Have you ever wondered how a broken-down British motorcycle became the symbol of the Latin American Revolution? What if I told you that the Norton 500 from the Motorcycle Diaries wasn't just one bike, but 7 different machines, and the real La Poderosa barely made it 3,000 miles before dying completely? The motorcycle that carried young Ernesto Guevara toward becoming Che held secrets spanning 50 years, 2 continents, and countless breakdowns. Today, we're counting down 20 weird facts about Che Guevara's Norton 500 from the Motorcycle Diaries that will completely change how you see this legendary journey. From the original bike's fate to film production nightmares involving machines older than the actors riding them, these revelations might just blow your mind. So buckle up, hit that like button if you love historical motorcycles and epic journeys, and let's ride into the secrets behind La Poderosa. Number 20. The real La Poderosa was already 13 years old.
So this is how we start a Norton.
When 23-year-old Ernesto Guevara and his friend Alberto Granado set out from Buenos Aires in January 1952, they weren't riding a new motorcycle. La Poderosa was a 1939 Norton 500 that had already lived a hard life. The bike was 13 years old, which in 1952 motorcycle terms meant it was ancient. Norton's 500 cubic centimeters single-cylinder engine was designed for British roads in moderate use, not the punishing South American terrain Guevara planned to cross. The previous owner had used it for commuting around Buenos Aires, relatively gentle duty that still left the bike worn. Granado borrowed the Norton from a friend who was happy to loan it because he considered it nearly worthless. The bike had already been rebuilt once, with mismatched parts and amateur repairs throughout. The clutch slipped, the suspension was shot, and the engine burned oil. Before they even left Argentina, mechanics told them the Norton wouldn't survive the journey. They were right. The bike's age meant parts were already scarce in 1952. Norton had moved on to newer models, and South American dealers rarely stocked components for 13-year-old British bikes. This obsolescence would plague the entire journey. Every breakdown meant fabricating repairs from whatever materials they could find. The Norton's age transformed the trip from a motorcycle journey into a mechanical survival challenge. Number 19. The nickname, La Poderosa, was deeply ironic. Alberto Granado nicknamed the Norton La Poderosa, which translates to the Mighty One or the Powerful One. This name was deeply intentionally ironic. The Norton 500 was neither mighty nor powerful by any reasonable measure. The single-cylinder engine produced roughly 26 horsepower when new. After 13 years of use and abuse, it probably made closer to 18 horsepower. For comparison, modern scooters produce more power. The bike's top speed was theoretically 70 miles per hour, but La Poderosa rarely exceeded 45 before something started rattling loose. Granado chose the name as a joke. He and Guevara both knew they were riding a barely functional machine, held together with a hope and wire. Calling it mighty was their way of laughing at the situation. The irony deepened as the journey progressed. Every breakdown made the name more absurd. When the bike's gearbox failed in Chile, leaving them stranded, Granado sarcastically referred to our mighty steed. When the engine finally died completely, leaving them to continue on foot and hitchhiking, the name became a memorial to their foolish optimism. Interestingly, the ironic nickname became serious in retrospect. La Poderosa carried them thousands of miles despite being mechanically doomed. The bike's refusal to die quickly earned its mighty nickname through sheer stubborn persistence. Number 18. The film production. Aimless Dallost. 7 different Norton 500 director Walter Salles couldn't rely on a single vintage Norton for his 2004 films. The production acquired 7 different Norton 500 GAT from the 1930s and 40s. Finding 7 working Nortons built between 1935 and 1945 was extraordinarily difficult. These bikes were already rare in 2004, with most examples in museums or private collections. The production sent buyers to England, where Norton originated, to find suitable motorcycles. They purchased bikes in various conditions, from fully restored show bikes to complete wrecks. Each Norton served a specific purpose. Bike number 1 was the hero motorcycle for close-ups and dialogue scenes. It was fully restored and cosmetically perfect, but mechanically unreliable. Bike number 2 was the primary riding motorcycle, mechanically sound but showing appropriate wear. Bikes 3 and 4 were stunt bikes for crashes and rough terrain. Bike 5 was a parts donor, cannibalized to keep the others running. Bikes 6 and 7 were backup units in case multiple motorcycles failed simultaneously. Despite having 7 bikes, the production still experienced constant mechanical problems. Vintage Nortons are notoriously temperamental, and asking them to perform reliably during film production was optimistic. The mechanical crew spent more time repairing motorcycles than the cameras spent filming them. By the end of production, only 3 of the 7 Nortons remained functional. The others had been destroyed, crashed, or simply died from old age. Number 17, the original. La Poderosa's final fate remains a mystery. Nobody knows what happened to the actual Norton 500 that Guevara and Granado rode. After the engine failed permanently in Chile, they abandoned the bike in a small town called Los Angeles. Granado later wrote that a local mechanic took the Norton, claiming he could repair it. That was March 1952, and the bike vanished into history. Over the decades, numerous Norton 500s have been claimed as the original La Poderosa. At least 14 different motorcycles in South America have been presented as Che's bike. Most are obvious frauds with incorrect year designations or features that didn't exist in 1939. A few are plausible candidates based on serial numbers and period-correct specifications. The most credible claim came from a Chilean collector in 1998 who owned a 1939 Norton 500 with a serial number matching Norton's production records from that year. The bike showed evidence of extensive repairs using improvised materials consistent with Granado's descriptions. However, Norton produced thousands of 500 cubic centimeters motorcycles, and proving definitively that any specific bike was Guevara's remains impossible. The lack of photographs showing the Norton serial number or unique identifying features means authentication is essentially guesswork. Some historians believe the original Norton was scrapped for parts decades ago, its components scattered across multiple bikes. The mystery adds to the legend, but frustrates historians and collectors. Number 16. Gael Garcia Bernal couldn't ride when cast as Che Gael. Garcia Bernal, cast to play young Ernesto Guevara, had never ridden a motorcycle before accepting the role. This created significant problems for a film where motorcycle riding was central to the story. Director Walter Soles initially assumed Bernal could ride or could learn quickly. The reality was more complicated. Bernal had grown up in Mexico City, where he'd never owned a motorcycle or even sat on one. His first attempt at riding a modern motorcycle during pre-production training resulted in an immediate crash in a parking lot. Training Bernal to ride a vintage Norton 500 was exponentially more difficult than teaching modern motorcycle operation. The Norton had a hand-shifted gearbox, meaning the clutch was hand-operated while the gear lever was foot-operated, opposite of modern bikes. The bike had no electric starter, requiring kickstarting technique and timing. The brakes were marginal by modern standards, and the handling was unpredictable. Bernal spent 4 months training before filming began. He started on modern motorcycles, learning basic balance and control. Then he progressed to vintage bikes with manual transmissions. Finally, he trained specifically on the Norton 500. By the time filming started, Bernal could handle Norton competently in controlled situations. However, stunt riders performed all the genuinely difficult riding, including the scenes on rough terrain and the eventual crashes. Number 15. The Norton's hand-shift gearbox confused modern riders. The 1939 Norton 500 featured a hand-shift gearbox that proved incredibly confusing for modern riders accustomed to foot-shift transmissions. On modern motorcycles, you shift with your left foot and operate the clutch with your left hand. The Norton reversed this completely. The clutch lever was on the left handlebar, operated by hand. The gear lever protruded from the right side of the fuel tank, shifted by the right hand. This meant riders had to let go of the throttle to shift gears, a disconcerting feeling for anyone trained on modern bikes. The shift pattern was also different. Modern bikes use a 1-down, 4-up pattern. The Norton used a 4-up, neutral at bottom pattern that varied depending on how the gearbox was assembled. During film production, this archaic gearbox created constant problems. Stunt riders trained on modern bikes would instinctively reach for a foot shifter that didn't exist. Several crashes occurred because riders forgot to use the hand shifter during critical moments. The production's riding coordinator had to completely retrain experienced stunt riders, essentially teaching them to ride from scratch. Even experienced vintage motorcycle riders found the Norton challenging. The hand shift required removing your right hand from the throttle, which meant losing acceleration during gear changes. This was particularly problematic during the film's mountain riding scenes, where maintaining momentum was crucial for crossing rough terrain. Number 14. The engine seized. Exactly as it did in real life, during filming, one of the production Norton 500 CS experienced catastrophic engine failure in almost the exact location where the real Poderosa died in 1952. This eerie coincidence happened while filming scenes in Chile, near the town of Los Angeles. The production was shooting a riding sequence when the Norton's engine made a horrible grinding noise and seized completely. The piston had welded itself to the cylinder wall from excessive heat and inadequate lubrication. This was precisely how the original Norton failed 72 years earlier. The production had been carefully maintaining all 7 motorcycles with modern oils and regular service. But vintage Norton engines have marginal oiling systems that struggle under sustained use. The film's requirement for multiple takes of the same riding sequences stressed the engine beyond its design limits. Mechanics disassembled the seized engine and found the piston had expanded from heat until it could no longer move within the cylinder. The cylinder wall showed deep scoring where the piston had ground against it. This matched descriptions from Granado's memoir about how La Poderosa died. Some crew members found the coincidental location spooky. Others saw it as validation that they were accurately depicting the journey's hardships. The seized engine forced a 3-day production delay, while mechanics cannibalized parts from the donor bikes to build a functioning replacement engine. Number 13. Alberto Granado visited the set and criticized everything. Alberto Granado, then 82 years old, visited the film production in 2003. He was the last surviving participant in the original journey, and his reactions to the recreation were brutally honest. Granado immediately criticized the condition of the Norton motorcycles. He claimed they looked too good, too clean, too well maintained. The real La Poderosa had been filthy, leaking oil constantly, and held together with improvised repairs. The pristine film bikes offended his memory of their struggling machine. He also criticized the actors riding. Granado said they rode too carefully, too tentatively. He and Guevara had ridden recklessly because they were young and stupid. The film's safety-conscious approach missed that youthful foolishness. Director Walter Salles took Granado's criticisms seriously. After his visit, the production intentionally dirtied the motorcycles, adding oil stains and road grime. They loosened some components to create authentic rattles and mechanical noises. They even instructed the actors to ride more aggressively in certain scenes. Granado's most interesting comment was about the Norton's sound. He said the film bike sounded too healthy. The real La Poderosa had a distinctive mechanical clattering from worn valve train components. The sound department recorded Granado describing the noise, then artificially added similar sounds to the film's audio track. Granado returned for a second set visit after these changes and grudgingly admitted the production had improved the authenticity. Number 12. The crash scene. Required destroying a 70-year-old motorcycle. The film's dramatic crash scene, where La Poderosa finally breaks down, required actually crashing a genuine 70-year-old Norton 500. This decision caused significant controversy within the production. Motorcycle preservationists argued that destroying a rare vintage Norton for a film was cultural vandalism. These bikes were becoming increasingly scarce, and each one destroyed was a loss to historical preservation. The production countered that authenticity required a real crash. CG. Art couldn't capture the weight and mechanical reality of a vintage motorcycle tumbling down an embankment. Director Walter Salles agreed to use the most damaged Norton from their fleet, the bike already cannibalized for parts. Even in its deteriorated state, destroying it felt wrong to many crew members. The stunt team prepared extensively for the single-take crash. They couldn't afford to destroy a Norton and then need to reshoot. Cameras were positioned at 7 different angles. The stunt rider, who'd trained for 6 weeks on the specific Norton they'd be crashing, wore period-appropriate clothing to match the film's aesthetic. The crash went perfectly on the first take. The Norton tumbled exactly as choreographed, suffering catastrophic damage. The frame bent, the engine case cracked, the forks twisted beyond repair. The bike that had survived 70 years was destroyed in 3 seconds of film time. After filming, the wrecked Norton was sold to a collector who planned to use it for parts to restore other Norton 500S number 11. The film's Norton sold at auction for $300,000. In 2009, 5 years after the film's release, one of the hero Norton 500Hi from the Motorcycle Diaries appeared at a Bonhams auction in London. The pre-auction estimate was £40,000 to £60,000. The bike sold for £210,000, approximately $300,000 at the time. This price was staggering for a Norton 500. Comparable bikes from the same era typically sold for $8,000 to $12,000. The Motorcycle Diaries provenance increased the value by over 2,000%. The winning bidder was an anonymous collector from South America who reportedly wanted the bike for a private museum dedicated to Che Guevara. The auction created controversy because the production had never clearly documented which Norton was which. The seller claimed this was the primary hero bike used in close-up shots with Gael Garcia Bernal. However, experts questioned this authentication. The bike showed evidence of hard use inconsistent with a close-up hero motorcycle. It appeared to be one of the stunt bikes instead. Bonham stood behind the provenance, presenting documentation from the production company. But the lack of clear photographic evidence linking this specific bike to specific scenes left doubts. Regardless of which production bike it actually was, the $300,000 sale price demonstrated the Motorcycle Diaries' cultural impact. A motorcycle's association with Che Guevara's journey, even a replica used in a film, commanded extraordinary value. Number 10. The carburetor required constant adjustment for altitude changes. The Norton 500 single Amal carburetor became the production's most persistent mechanical headache. Carburetors mix fuel and air in precise ratios, but that ratio must change dramatically with altitude. At sea level in Buenos Aires, the carburetor worked adequately. As the journey climbed into the Andes, reaching altitudes over 12,000 feet, the air became thinner. The carburetor continued delivering the same amount of fuel, but received less oxygen, creating an overly rich mixture. The engine would run poorly, lose power, and foul spark plugs constantly. The real Guevara and Granado dealt with this by stopping frequently to adjust the carburetor's needle valve. For the film production, this meant the mechanical crew had to retune the carburetor multiple times daily as filming locations changed altitude. Modern fuel-injected motorcycles handle altitude changes automatically through electronic sensors. The Norton's primitive carburetor required manual intervention every few thousand feet of elevation change. The production's master mechanic, a British Norton specialist named Colin, became an expert at carburetor adjustment. He could determine the correct needle position by listening to the engine note. Still, the constant tuning slowed production significantly. Scenes filmed at high altitude required hours of carburetor preparation before cameras could roll. This authentic detail reminded everyone how mechanically demanding the original journey truly was. Number 9. Period correct. Tires were impossible to find. The production faced an unexpected problem. Nobody manufactures tires for 1939 Norton 500s anymore. The original tires were 3.5 inches wide with a unique 19-inch diameter and tube-type construction. Modern motorcycle tires use completely different sizing standards and tubeless technology. After months of searching, the production found exactly 3 sets of period-correct tires in a warehouse in Birmingham, England. These tires were old stock from the 1960s, already 40 years old when purchased. Vintage tire experts warned that 60-year-old rubber would be dangerously unreliable. The tires could crack, separate, or blow out unpredictably. For close-up shots where the tires would be visible on camera, the production used these authentic but dangerous vintage tires. For actual riding scenes, they compromised by using modern tires in the closest available size and painting them to match the period appearance. The modern tires were 3.25 inches wide instead of 3.5, close enough to be invisible on camera. This meant the production's Norton bikes rode on anachronistic tires throughout filming. The modern rubber provided better grip and reliability, but sacrificed absolute authenticity. One of the vintage tires did blow out during a test ride, validating the decision to use modern alternatives for actual riding sequences. Number 8. The exhaust note was entirely recreated in post-production. Everything you hear when La Poderosa's engine runs in the film is fake. The actual Norton 500s used during production had exhaust systems modified for safety and legal compliance. Modern film productions must meet noise regulations, even when filming vintage motorcycles. The original Norton exhaust was straight-piped and produced around 105 decibels, too loud for location filming in populated areas. The production installed baffled mufflers that reduced noise to approximately 85 decibels. This made the bikes legal, but completely changed their sound character. The deep, aggressive thump of an unbaffled Norton single-cylinder became a muted putter. Sound designer Martin Hernandez knew this wouldn't work for the film. He needed the authentic Norton sound that Guevara and Granado experienced. Hernandez traveled to England and recorded a completely original 1939 Norton 500 with factory exhaust. The bike belonged to a collector who'd maintained it in absolutely stock condition. Hernandez recorded hours of audio at different engine speeds and loads. In post-production, he replaced every sound from the production bikes with this authentic Norton audio. He even added mechanical noises, valve clatter, chain slap, and gear whine that the production bikes didn't produce. The result sounds more authentic than the actual bikes used during filming. Number 7. The sidecar was rejected. After it kept tipping over, early script drafts included a sidecar attached to La Poderosa, following some accounts suggesting Guevara and Granado briefly used one. The production built a period-correct sidecar and attached it to one of the Norton 500s. Testing revealed a dangerous problem. The Norton 500 was never designed for sidecar use. Its frame lacked the reinforcement needed, and the suspension couldn't handle the additional weight and asymmetric forces. During test rides, the bike sidecar combination was dangerously unstable. Taking left turns was terrifying because the sidecar wanted to lift off the ground. Right turns were equally bad, as the bike itself would try to tip over. The handling was so unpredictable that stunt riders refused to use it. Director Walter Salles consulted with historians and Granado himself. They concluded that while a sidecar might have been briefly attempted, it was quickly abandoned as impractical. This matched the production's experience perfectly. The sidecar was written out of the film entirely. One crew member joked they should have kept it to show authenticity, since the real journey was full of bad decisions. The sidecar appears in exactly one shot, visible in the background when they're preparing to leave Buenos Aires. Then, it vanishes from the story. Number 6. Insurance companies charged triple rates for vintage motorcycles, damaged vehicles, insuring 7. Norton 500s built between 1935 and 1945 for film production created unexpected financial problems. Standard film production insurance covers vehicles, but insurers consider vintage motorcycles extremely high risk. The underwriters calculated that 70-year-old motorcycles being ridden aggressively for a film would almost certainly result in crashes, mechanical failures, and total losses. The initial insurance quote was $300,000 to cover all 7 bikes for the 6-month production schedule. This was triple the normal rate for film vehicles. The production tried to negotiate lower rates by arguing the bikes weren't worth that much. The insurers countered that replacement value wasn't the issue. Finding 7 more period-correct Norton 500s would be nearly impossible if these were destroyed. The final compromise involved the production accepting higher deductibles and agreeing to use professional stunt riders for all dangerous scenes. This reduced the premium to $200,000, still expensive but manageable. The insurance proved necessary. By production's end, 2 bikes were total losses, 3 required major repairs, and only 2 remained in their original condition. The insurance paid out over $150,000 in claims. The underwriters were vindicated in their risk assessment. Vintage motorcycles being used for film production were indeed as dangerous as predicted. Number 5. Filming in the Andes revealed dangerous cooling system. inadequacy. The Norton 500's cooling system was designed for British weather, temperate, often rainy, rarely exceeding 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The Andes presented completely different conditions. High altitude meant thinner air with reduced cooling capacity. Intense sun at elevation heated the engine externally. Sustained climbing puts continuous load on the engine. The combination caused severe overheating problems. The Norton's engine cooling relied entirely on air flowing over the cylinder fins. At high altitude, the thinner air provided less cooling despite higher wind speeds. During climbing scenes, where the bike labored uphill at low speeds, airflow was minimal while engine load was maximum. Multiple times during Andes filming, Norton engines seized from overheating. The cylinder would expand beyond tolerance, the piston would bind, and the engine would lock solid. Production had to halt while mechanics disassembled engines, honed cylinders, and fitted new pistons. The mechanical crew developed a solution. They drilled additional cooling fins into the cylinder heads, increasing surface area for heat dissipation. This modification was completely inauthentic to 1939 Norton specifications, but necessary for survival. They also installed temperature sensors that would alert riders before seizure occurred. Even with modifications, the bikes could only climb for 20 minutes before requiring cool-down periods. The Andes scenes that appear continuous in the film were actually shot in short segments separated by cooling breaks. Number 4. Ernesto's medical bag created dangerous weight distribution weight diagram. The film accurately depicts Guevara carrying his medical bag on the Norton. However, the production discovered this created serious handling problems. The medical bag was strapped to the left side of the rear carrier, directly behind the rider. This asymmetric weight caused the motorcycle to pull left constantly. Riders had to maintain constant right pressure on the handlebars to compensate. During straight-line riding, this was merely annoying. During corners, especially right turns, the imbalanced weight made the bike want to continue turning left, even when the rider steered right. Several minor crashes occurred before the production understood the cause. The real Guevara and Granado dealt with this by redistributing weight constantly and developing muscle memory to compensate. Film writers didn't have months to develop that adaptation. The production solution was partially filling the medical bag with lightweight foam instead of actual medical equipment. This maintained the visual appearance while reducing weight from roughly 20 pounds to 7 pounds. For wide shots where the bag's contents weren't visible, they used an empty prop bag weighing only 2 pounds. Only in close-up showing Guevara accessing medical supplies did they use a fully loaded, authentic bag. This meant the Norton's handling characteristics changed, depending on which medical bag was installed for different shots. Number 3. The Kickstarter broke. More frequently than any other component, the Norton 500's Kickstarter mechanism was the single most failure-prone component throughout production. The Kickstarter broke, bent, or sheared off completely, 23 separate times during 6 months of filming. This Victorian-era starting system required a violent downward kick to turn the engine over. The Kickstarter shaft was hardened steel, but relatively thin to save weight. Enter the force of repeated kick-starting, especially by riders unfamiliar with the technique. The shaft would fatigue and eventually fracture. The production went through 17 replacement Kickstarter assemblies. After exhausting available vintage parts, the mechanical crew had to fabricate Kickstarters from modern steel using the original as a template. They manufactured 30 Kickstarters from high-strength chromoly steel, much tougher than the original component. Even these improved versions failed occasionally. The problem was technique. Modern riders accustomed to electric starters would kick too hard and too fast, shocking the mechanism. Proper Norton starting requires a smooth, firm kick with correct timing. Training riders in proper kickstarting technique became as important as teaching them to actually ride the bike. The most embarrassing Kickstarter failure happened during a scene where Guevara dramatically kickstarts the bike. The shaft snapped on camera, visible in the shot. They had to halt filming for 3 hours while installing a replacement before they could complete the scene. Number 2. The production accidentally started a Norton 500 collector's market boom. Before the Motorcycle Diaries premiered in 2004, Norton 500s from the 1930s and 40s were obscure collector items. They sold for $5,000 to $8,000 when they sold at all. Most languished in barns and garages, considered too primitive for serious riding and not prestigious enough for museum-quality collections. The film changed everything. Within months of release, Norton 500 values began climbing. Collectors suddenly wanted the bike Che rode, even though most Norton 500s had no connection to Guevara whatsoever. By 2006, decent Norton 500s were selling for $20,000 to $30,000. Pristine examples reached $50,000. The sudden demand created a shortage. There weren't many Norton 500s available, and owners who'd been trying to sell them for years now refused. Some held out for even higher prices. Others decided to keep bikes that were suddenly valuable. The boom also created a fraud epidemic. Unscrupulous sellers began claiming ordinary Norton 500s were the actual bike from the film, or Che's personal motorcycle. Fake provenance documents appeared. Buyers paid premium prices for bikes with fabricated histories. The production's decision not to clearly mark or track individual motorcycles made authentication impossible. The Norton Owners Club eventually issued warnings about fake Motorcycle Diaries bikes. They estimated at least 30 fraudulent bikes were sold to unsuspecting collectors. Number 1, the film saved Norton motorcycles from bankruptcy. Here's the most remarkable legacy of the Motorcycle Diaries Norton 500. The film indirectly saved the Norton Motorcycle Company from complete extinction. By 2004, Norton had declared bankruptcy multiple times and was barely operating. The company existed mainly as a brand name with minimal actual motorcycle production. Then, the Motorcycle Diaries created worldwide interest in Norton motorcycles. Suddenly, Norton represented adventure, rebellion, and historical significance. Enthusiasts who'd never heard of Norton before saw the film and wanted to own a piece of that heritage. This renewed interest attracted new investors to Norton. A British businessman named Stuart Garner purchased the company in 2008, specifically citing the Motorcycle Diaries as evidence that Norton had cultural value worth preserving. Garner invested millions rebuilding Norton as a premium motorcycle manufacturer. By 2012, Norton was producing modern motorcycles that honored their heritage while incorporating current technology. The company's marketing heavily featured their historical significance, including oblique references to famous Norton riders like Che Guevara. By 2020, Norton employed over 100 people and produced several models sold worldwide. The company still faces financial challenges, but it survived and revived partially because a film about a 70-year-old journey reminded the world that Norton meant something. La Poderosa's legacy extended beyond Che Guevara's revolution to saving the company that built it. The Norton 500 transcended its role as mere transportation to become a character in both Guevara's real journey and the film that immortalized it. From catastrophic mechanical failures to accidentally saving a motorcycle company from extinction, La Poderosa's story proves that sometimes the journey matters more than the destination, especially when your vehicle barely works. Vehicle barely works. Vehicle barely works. Vehicle barely works.